Okay, all right. Can everyone see the slide?
Yep.
Okay, amazing. Good evening, dear students, and welcome to the first thesis workshop organized by the Writing and Academic Resource Center, or in short, WORK. And the workshop is dedicated to developing a research question, framing a hypothesis. My name is Khladnan Sheraliyev, WORK coordinator, and we also have Maria Antonova, WORK director, present in the workshop. So before we start, I need to clarify one point, that there is a common belief that thesis projects start with selecting a topic. However, it's the topic that gives you clear direction for the research and writing thesis. Instead, it's a research question, and it's the most important element for starting your senior thesis project. And that's why for the first thesis workshop, we selected this topic, and we believe that it will be helpful and useful for you throughout this academic year. Okay, before we start, let's start by defining what is research. As a formal definition of the research, we selected the definition from US Code of Federal Regulations, which states that research is a systematic investigation, the gathering and analysis of information designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. But to put it simply, research is a process of discovering new knowledge. And the research begins with asking questions. And it all starts with your own curiosity. For most topics, it's very likely that others have already conducted or already have asked similar questions in a particular area. But a good researcher knows that unanswered questions remain in every domain of subjects. And the researcher needs to become familiar with the research findings that already exist. And these findings are most likely to be reported in books, journal articles, and reviewing them helps a researcher to find a research problem, and thus a research question. So here we have the importance of going through the existing literature, right? Articles, books about a particular topic in order to be able to ask those questions which are not answered or not answered enough. And now, what is a research question? So a research question is a specific question which the research seeks to provide an answer to. So all starts with a research question, as it was mentioned before. And why research question is the most important element is that it defines a clear path for the research process. So it specifies what the research study hopes to learn or find. And the research question is presented as a question. You can ask by what, how, why, and etc. And now let's see. Like the question may arise: how to come up with a research question, and not just research question, but with a good research question. And here we have four steps. And the first step is to identify the research interest or field. So you can, depending on what your major is, you may select the research interest. And it can be international agreements, integration, human rights, diplomacy, mass media, poverty, education, income disparity, protest, the role of women in international relations. So this is more political science or international relations field. And you can also choose race, ethnicity, or immigration, gender, culture and tradition, public economics and regulation, economic history and history of economic theory, social and personal psychology, perception, cognition, cognitive neuroscience, and so on and so forth. So the first step is to identify the research interest or the field that you are interested to do your senior project. And the second stage is to select a research interest and narrow it down to a specific topic. Since we are not writing the book, we need to have a very specific topic. And now we can have an example. Let's look at an example. Let's say that we selected, as for research interest, we selected integration. And now we need to make it more specifically. What kind of integration, right? We can ask, let's say, regional integration. And the next question can be where. Let's take an example, let's say European Union and the case of Brexit. And it's also important to put time framework. And the time framework, let's say 2021 to 2022. So now, in the second stage, we are clear with what is our research interest. And we made this research interest, we made it more specific. And we came to a specific topic. And next, the third stage is very crucial. It's very vital. And it's a bit challenging, but you need to go through this stage as well. Otherwise, you may have not well-developed research question. And the third stage is to find and explore the problem or puzzle. So as for what we have discussed here, right, we selected integration, then regional integration. We focused on European Union, specifically Brexit. And now let's see what is interesting in Brexit case and European Union. So let's read this statement. While being a member of the European Union, the United Kingdom was required to follow the European Union labor rules. Post-Brexit, however, the UK is no longer required to adhere to European Union labor rules. Changes in labor law tend to have a significant influence on businesses' access to talent and skills, as well as their capacity to retain people and skills. Therefore, it's interesting to examine the impact of Brexit on workers in different industries in the UK since the transition period ended on December 31st, 2020. So here we have the puzzle. Well, the UK is no longer required to follow the rules, right? Specifically labor rules put by European Union. And therefore we see some change here. And the problem is how this change can have impact on workers of different industries in the UK. So this is the third stage. And then the last stage in the development of a research question is formulating the first version or the initial research question. So it's not the final research question. Well, it can be the final research question, but in most cases, it's the first version. So working on your thesis, you may happen to add some element or to make some change, small or big change in your research question. And it's totally okay. So our last stage in the development of a research question is to formulate the first version. So based on what we have seen regarding the research interest narrowing it down, and then the puzzle or problem. Now let's formulate the first version of research question. Let's say, how has Brexit impacted the labor market in the United Kingdom? So this can be our initial or first version research question. So the question is, how has Brexit, like the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union, impacted the labor market in the United Kingdom? So with this, we developed quite a good research question. And now let's sum up what we have discussed. So we have started by selecting, right, identifying research interest. And then we move to narrowing it down, making it more specific to a particular time framework, location, and specificity. And then we try to find out the puzzle, the problem, right? What is interesting in this research question? And then we formulated the first version of research question. So that's the kind of summary of stages in the development of the research question. And we also have what's so-called thinner criteria for a good research question. And now let's look how to make sure that our question is good enough. So F refers to the possibility of the research question, or what's so-called feasible. Is this research possible, right? Is it manageable in scope? Given the time, given the resources that you have, you need to make sure that the research is can we mute the microphone? Okay, thank you so much. So the first thing is this research possible, right? Is it feasible in scope? And I refers to the following point: interesting. Is it interesting? Getting the answer attracts investigator, peers, or community. So your research question should also be interesting, so that it attracts first yourself, then your peers, your community, right? Your professors, your department, faculty, and so on and so forth. N is about novelty. Does it add anything new to the existing research? You need to make sure that you bring something new, right? You contribute to the existing knowledge in your field. Ethical. Does it correspond to the rules of IRB? You may have already heard about IRB or its rules. So you need to make sure that it's compliant to the study that the Institutional Review Board will approve. So when you conduct an interview or survey and you collect primary data, you need to go through IRB process, get their approval, and then start the research. So your topic should not be unethical, right? And then the next is relevant. Is it relevant to your field of study? So it should be applicable to scientific knowledge or and future research, and obviously your department. So you may apply thinner criteria for your when formulating your research question. And yes, so working out a research question, how from which sources you may come up with a research question. First is reading. You can ask yourself, has anything that you have read caught your interest, right? So you have been studying for some time, right, at the university, at least 3-4 years. And you may ask yourself, like, has anything that I have read caught my interest? Second, discussion. Any points that emerge from discussion with your peers or professors that you think are worth exploring. During debates, right, during discussions, you might have some points, discussed in the discussions, and you think that they are worth exploring. And number 3 is free writing. So you can spend 15 minutes or more or less writing on the topic that you may be interested in asking W questions, right? Who, what, where, when, why, how. And the last one, searching the databases. So it refers to your research. You may go to a UCA library, right? Do some research, read some sources, books, articles, and see what is interesting or what catches your attention, curiosity, and so on and so forth. So this is about the research question. And now let's smoothly connect the research question with hypothesis. So how are they connected? Well, so there is a strong and quite direct connection between research question and hypothesis. So as was mentioned before, you come up with a research question, do research to find an answer, right? So this answer is called hypothesis. So the goal of your research is to find the answer to the research question that you have. And the answer to your research question is called hypothesis. Okay, what is hypothesis? A hypothesis can be defined as a tentative explanation of the research problem, as possible outcome of the research, or an educated guess about the research outcome. And to put it simple, right? In other words, a hypothesis is a clear statement of what is aimed to be investigated. So it can be proved or disproved. And in both cases, it is valuable. An example. So we have come up with the following question, right? How has Brexit had an impact? Let's correct it right now. So we had, how has Brexit impacted? How has Brexit impacted? Okay, so how has Brexit impacted the labor market of the United Kingdom? And our hypothesis could be the following. The withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union has led to a shortage of labor and an increase in demand for workers, especially in low-wage industries such as retail, hospitality, and leisure. So this is what we expect to find, right, throughout our research. And it can be our hypothesis. So
is it video? Ой, и мне надо...
Leticia, can you mute yourself? Okay, thank you so much.
Oh my God, can you?
Okay, so now let's have a look at the nature of hypothesis and see if the hypothesis that we have matches with the following principles. So the first, the hypothesis can be tested. So the hypothesis should be able to be checked to be true or false. Second, hypotheses are not moral or ethical questions, and it should be formulated without any normative element, such as good or bad or should. So you should not formulate your hypothesis saying that, well, something is good or something is bad or something should be done in these or certain ways. So any normative element should be should not be present while formulating a hypothesis. Number 3, it is neither too specific nor too general. So it should be able to provide a sufficient answer to a research question. And number 4, it is a prediction of consequences. And it should be able to present the possible outcome of the research. So this is the nature of the hypothesis. So if you look at our hypothesis, well, it can be tested, right? So you are making a guess. You're predicting the possible outcome, saying that it has led to shortage of labor and an increase in demand for workers, right? While UK was a member of European Union, citizens of Poland, right? Other European Union countries, they had direct access to the country. Well, now they need to apply for visa and so on and so forth. And it's not moral, so we don't have any element of normative element. Something is good or something is bad, or something should be done in certain ways. And it's quite specific and not too general. It provides sufficient response. And and then it's a prediction of what we hope to find or to learn. So now let's bring some examples and see how it works. So the first point about the hypothesis is that it can be tested, right? It should be able to be checked to be true or false. So let's look at the good example of hypothesis. Students who attend classes have higher grades than students who skip classes. So this hypothesis seems to be testable, right? So you are predicting that students who attend classes, they might have higher grades than those students who skip. And by the end of the research, once you conduct your research, you will have data, and then you will see if it is true or false, if your statement is true or false. The second point, hypotheses are not moral or ethical questions. So it should be formulated without any normative element, such as good, bad, should, and so on and so forth. So let's look at the bad example of hypothesis. Students who attend classes are good at learning, while students who skip classes are not. Thus, they should attend the classes. So, so here in this hypothesis, we have this normative elements such as good, should, or good not, and so on and so forth. So you may consider it as not a good hypothesis. And next, so the hypothesis should be neither too specific nor too general. And so it should be able to provide a sufficient answer to a research question. And let's look at this what's so-called bad hypothesis. Some countries are richer than others because of their location, climate, population, and politics. So this hypothesis seems to be quite general because it looks at the location, climate, population, and politics, which are very general things to study. Let's look now at a good example. So it is a prediction of consequences. So a good hypothesis would be Kenya, right? Instead of some countries, we have here Kenya. Kenya is relatively richer than other African countries because it has a more inclusive economic system. So here we have one country instead of some countries, and we have one specific variable, right? One specific point, a more inclusive economic system. Rather than focusing on location, right? Climate, politics, population, here we are going only with one variable. Good. And the last but not least, hypothesis is considered valuable even if proven false. So even if by the end of your research you
what I heard about this course.
Azamat, can you mute yourself?
How to teach history as a possible peak of that.
Okay. Okay, so hypothesis is considered valuable even if proven false. So even if your findings will not support your hypothesis, it is still considered valuable. So keep that in mind. Okay, formulating a hypothesis. So data collection and literature review will help you in the formulation and gradual development of the hypothesis. So like research question, your hypothesis can be changed or can be developed over the course of writing your senior project. And the following sources can help the researcher in coming up with a good hypothesis. So first is review of literature and theories, addressing your research question. So going through the existing articles, books, right, literature, and reading theories which address your research question might help you to formulate your hypothesis. And second, discussing with experts, with professors in the given field to understand the problem in depth. You might want to talk with your professors, right, or with some experts in the field that you are doing your research, your senior project, or looking at previous empirical studies done on the given area. So these sources will help you in formulating your hypothesis. And now let me give you some tips for developing a research question and hypothesis for research studies. So first, perform a systematic literature review. And this is very important because it strengthens your understanding, your knowledge about the topic that you are focusing. Second, learn about current trends or most recent studies about your topic. Look at the news, like articles and books, they are not enough. Look at the news, at the recent publications, and maybe recent case studies, which are somehow related to your topic. Seek careful input from experts, mentors, professors, and also peers. So you might want to talk with your professor to get some ideas, to listen, to get their perspective, and apply the FINER criteria, right? Is it feasible? Is it interesting? Can you have any novelty, right? Is it ethical? Is it relevant? And then develop a research hypothesis from the research question. So since we discussed the connection, right, between research question and hypothesis, they have a very direct relationship. And make sure that your hypothesis comes from the research question, and your hypothesis response, right, provides a response to your research question. And last but not least, ensure that the research question is answerable, feasible, and clinically relevant. Yeah, so these are the 6 tips that you might take into account. And yeah, thank you so much for your attention. We are open for questions and comments.
May I add something?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just, I just wanted to say that all of those things that we were talking about, they are applicable, obviously, to pretty much any field. So, Hirad, will you give me the ability to share for just 1 second?
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to mention an example of my own, the example of a study that I did a few years ago. And my field is very different. It is education, not political science. So, but I actually just wanted to let you know that I went through the same steps, right? So of coming up with a research question. So first, Hirad mentioned research interest, right? So like, what is it that you're interested in, right? A lot of people, there is a topic that people are interested in, right? So like the integration was the example that we got from political science. Unsurprisingly, my research interest was peer tutoring because the work is a peer tutoring center. That's what I do. So I did, so that is what I was interested in. So, but the problem is that a lot of people, they just take the research interest and they start researching right away. And because of that, they end up with too much information, right? And they don't really have a specific issue that they are addressing. So that's why we have to narrow it down, right? Like as Hirad said, narrow down. And I, and I narrowed it down to peer tutoring at AUCA, which is the center that we are. Then there was a puzzle and the problem. And this, I just wanted to say that there is absolutely no way to overestimate the importance of your own curiosity in this situation. So you have to know what is it that you're really interested in finding out, right? So as the director of a learning support center, I was really interested in to what extent are we helpful to the students, right? Are we helpful to students, right? To student success, right? That is what I really wanted to know. What we do, does it really impact anybody, or we're just doing it because it's good to have a learning support center? So, and my first question, right? My first question was, a research question was, does the work influence student success? And then I looked at it, and that was version 1. And then I thought that this is kind of a yes or no question. So the answer is probably going to be yes or no. And then I came up with another version, is how does peer tutoring center at AUCA contribute to student success? And that ended up being my research question. So basically, it is good to have a research interest, but it is also very important to have a problem that you are interested in looking at and converting that problem into the question. So, and then as to hypothesis, right? My hypothesis is that a peer tutoring center at AUCA has a positive influence on student grades and overall retention. So this is what I thought the answer was going to be, right? But the one thing that I think we absolutely need to do is that we need to be prepared for the hypothesis to fail. And if no such correlation was discovered, if at the end of my research, it turned out that a peer tutoring center at UCA is totally useless, then I would have accepted those findings. So as Hirad said, a hypothesis is useful even when it is proven false. And actually my results were different. is that my results ended up being that a peer tutoring center at AUCA not only has a positive influence on student grades and retention, right? But also influences students' stress levels and self-perception. So that was very interesting. I didn't expect that to come out, right? But that came out. That turns out that going to a peer tutor lowers people's stress level, and it also makes them think of themselves in a more positive way. So you have to have that answer, sort of the guess what your answer might be, but also you have to prepare that your answer is going to change, and you have to be prepared that it's not going to be quite what you expected it to be. And the same with a research question, right? Is that you will go through several iterations of a research question, right? Until you arrive at a question that you really, really want to ask. So that's it. I just wanted to give an example to everyone, and we have a few minutes. So I was hoping that we would be able to workshop this a little bit, and to maybe give people just a few minutes to talk about these things. So to think, like, for example, a research interest. Okay, so let's start with a simple thing, right? So give it the minute, 30 seconds, and think about what is your research interest, right? And that it can be quite broad. We usually start broad, and that's okay. And also remember that your research interests might change. Nobody's getting married to their research interest right now, but maybe a few people can tell us what their research interest is in 1 or 2 words. You can just raise your hands if you want to. Anybody like to tell us what their research interest is, or you can put it in the chat if you like. So question is, okay, so we have one answer in the chat. Mental health. Good. It's nice and broad. It's a good place to start. Anybody else is interested in sharing their research interest? And remember, guys, that it's sharing your research interest is actually a very healthy thing to do. International trade. We have one from Aman. Can we have one more to make it 3? Procrastination and time management strategies. That's going to be very useful to you when you're writing your thing. Okay, good. So now the question is, can you narrow it down, right, to time, place, specific situation, or something like that? So mental health, of course, is a huge, it's a huge broad field, right? So can you narrow it down to specific time, place, specific situation, population, and so on? Okay, procrastination and time management of AUCA students. Exactly. So we already have narrowed it down. Okay, we can even, like, if you want to, you can narrow it down even further to, let's say, first years versus fourth years, right? So freshmen versus seniors, right? You can narrow down to 1 or 2 population groups. Okay, would anybody else be interested in trying to narrow things down, or think about how they're going to narrow things down? Aman, for example, your international trade. I mean, how so international trade, how are you planning to narrow it down?
Well, I was thinking about something like international trade in developing countries, but still it's kind of, I feel, a little bit too broad. Yes.
So that's good. You have a good sense of, that, yeah, it's narrowed down, but it's not narrowed down enough yet, right? And so, so you will continue working on narrowing it down further. So that is, it's always a good idea to have that feeling. I think it still needs to be a little bit, a little bit more focused. Okay, and then the very important thing, the most important thing, I would say, is the puzzle or the problem, right? So what is it that you really want to know? What is it that you really are wondering about, that you need, that you want the answer to? And that is really what is going to drive your research question. So what is that question that you want to know the answer to? Is anybody willing to share? And like I said, nobody's getting married to the question right now, so it's going to change many, many times. Good thing if it, time. What are the reasons for procrastination of students at AUCA? Okay, good. So that's what you really want to people. Why are people procrastinating, right? Are they procrastinating out of fear? Are they procrastinating because they have other things going on? Are they procrastinating because they're not sufficiently supported? Are they procrastinating because they are not familiar with time management techniques? There could be so many reasons, right, why they are, procrastinating. And that puzzle is really going to drive your research question, okay? And that is something that that puzzle will determine ultimately your research question. So we have another thing in the chat. Procrastination, can you use two notions once? Procrastination and time management. I would say start with one thing that you're really interested in and see if you can answer that question. And we are going to talk about it in just a minute. So let's talk about the hypothesis. Yes, hypothesis is your guess, kind of an educated guess of what the answer is going to be. And Musal, I wanted to ask you, what is your hypothesis? Why do you think, what do you think are the reasons for procrastination among AUCA students? Give us a guess.
Is that for me? Because that's not my research question.
Okay, I'm sorry, that wasn't your research question. So who is the procrastination person?
I get him.
Okay, I get him, yes.
Sorry, I didn't think about hypothesis, so
Yes.
I'm thinking now, yes.
Yes, and as Hirat said, hypothesis doesn't happen right away, right? It's not something like, whoa, I'm making a wild guess, right? Hypothesis has to be, it's not a wild guess, it's an educated guess. So you would need to read a little bit. You would need to talk to your professors. You have to do some preliminary research, so your guess is educated, right? So, and I wanted to cover one more time, the criteria for a research question, because it's not enough to ask a research question, is that finer criteria that Hira talked about. So let's say you have a research question, and as I said, it's going to change so many times. Some people, and please don't be one of those people, change their research question in March. So we don't want that, okay? Feasible, right? So is it possible to, is the research possible, right? For example, if I did a study, for example, of peer tutoring in the United States, right? I would not have time to complete that project, right? I had 6 months to complete the project, less than 6 months. So I had to, by necessity, limit it to just AUCA, and I had to limit it to 3 years, right? So interesting. So the question is interesting. Interesting to who, right? Well, first of all, it has to be interesting to you. If it's not interesting to you, it's not going to be interesting to anybody, trust me. But it has to be interesting to you. It has to be interesting to your peers, in my case, other educators, and to the scientific community. And I found out that this is something that was actually very interesting to other people, to my colleagues, because many universities have peer tutoring centers, but they don't really ask whether those peer tutoring centers are useful. And so it was a big it was very good for my colleagues to discover, to see that somebody was actually looking into the impact of peer tutoring on student success, right? So novel, right? So to what extent is it new to you? To what extent is this research new? And what is it bringing to this scientific community, right? So are you just repeating the research that other people did 10,000 times before you, or are you really bringing something new to it? And in my case, it was relatively novel because people tend to study impact of peer tutoring on people's grades, but they don't tend to study the effect of peer tutoring on people's sort of psychological state, right? And so that was relatively new. I'm not saying I'm the only person in the world who did it, but there are not so many people that did it, right? Because people used to think student success is all about grades, right? And ethical, right? Is it ethical to ask that question? Does it correspond to the rules of IRB? As you know, we have an institutional review board that reviews the ethics of your research, and because I had human subjects, I went through the entire IRB process, right? And they made sure that I wasn't doing anything ethical, like like paying people for research, for answers, or that I wasn't, that my questions were objective and not like kind of skewed in a certain way, right? I wasn't coming in and asking students, so tell me why you are happy with, why the work is good for you. That wouldn't be ethical, right? To ask a question like that, because it's not objective, right? And finally, relevant. Is it relevant to my field of study? Well, I work at the Learning Support Center. And it's really relevant to what I do. So these are the finer criteria. So once you have a research question, run it through these criteria. Good or bad. So that's basically was my contribution to this. So kind of a quick review and sort of just sharing my experience of doing research in the field different from political science, which is what Hirad did. Okay. Do we have, okay. All right, so somebody said that you want to help students to manage your time wisely, and you want to make some contribution about this topic. Well, it's great to want to make a contribution, but as we said before, what you really need to have is a question, right? Right, because you are not a social worker, you are a scientist, you are a psychologist. So therefore, if you want to make a contribution, that is something that volunteering and so on is for. A researcher starts with a question. Okay, Hirad, your hand is up. I'll hand it to you now.
So when it comes to finding a puzzle or research problem, it's a good idea to refer to some event, right? To some fact. For example, how it happened, right? And we all studied online. And suddenly, you, as an observer, observed that students began to procrastinate more than before COVID time and before online studying. And then the question comes, right? Why or how did the online studying affect students in regard with procrastination and time management, or something like this? So your puzzle should be backed up by some source, some event, some fact, so that it will be more interesting, and it will be interesting really, right? Not just hypothetically, but with facts.
Any other questions or comments, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, well, looks like we ran out. Well, we are in room 229. You guys know where to find us. This workshop is going to be on YouTube. So thank you so much for coming. And there's going to be, the next workshop is going to be a week and 1 day from now, so 8 days from now. And that, I believe, is literature review.
Mhm.
So, you know, so come for that as well, if you're interested. Okay, thank you guys.